I'm particularly excited, and I know all of us are, to hear about that wonderful place and that wonderful space that we all admire from a gentleman named Mike Parker, who's going to tell us all about it. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks. Morning, folks. Now, first off, I guess I'd like to just do a quick poll. Who's familiar with that yellow cottage? Just a show of hands. Oh, wow. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that place. We'll start there. Okay. A little bit of a story here. As children, my brothers and I experienced the excitement of the Friday evening cottage drive. Archie comics in hand, bellies full, after wolfing down an after-school meal, possibly a dose of Gravol, and nothing but our own thoughts and possibly some singing to pass the time before arriving at our destination. For me, traveling to the lake always produced an extra number of butterflies in my stomach, for I knew the next 48 hours would possibly be filled with boat rides, fishing, swimming, sand castles, water skiing, exploring, playing with the Longs, our next-door neighbors, bonfires, or any number of other adventures. I say possibly because you just never knew what was in store. There was no plan, no schedule. There was no city, just the lake. What I do know is that Grandpa and Grandma would be there, as this was their summer home. Now, I had my own landmarks that called out time remaining in our drive. There was the tree line just past Steinbach. I'm from Winnipeg. The Forest Ranger Tower, at which time we would ask Dad to tell us the forest fire story again. On to Pine Grove Halt, as it was known at the time. Of course, passing Prada and McMunn. And then finally Falcon Lake. This was the beginning of the home stretch, where trees, lakes, and rock cuts told you that the city was far behind and that adventure would soon be realized. As most of you know, prior to the bypass, Highway 17 went right through Keewatin, Norman, and Kenora. There was little in the way of signage, just a simple Keewatin 2 miles, Kenora 4 miles sign. My "we're there" moment was spying the first 2-story house at the top of the hill, visible as you crested what I would call Bergman's Hill. Though modernized and upgraded with siding now, then it was sort of a military maroon and off yellow. When I saw that house, I knew that we would soon slow down and meander our way to my next landmark, the Southview Motel. I didn't know the street name then. Of course, that's 9th Avenue, 9th Street. But what I did know, it was with a right turn off the highway and down the hill. It was almost like stepping through the door from the present to the past. This was the Keewatin Beach Road. Now, let me be clear. I've shortened the name in recent years to reflect the name on the street signs, but the beach road will always be known as the Keewatin Beach Road to me. I just wanted to make that clear. We would crawl out of the car. And of course, the first thing that hit you is the smell. A delicious blend of pine, grass, dirt, and lake breezes. And if you were lucky, depending on the season, a burning fire from the cottage fireplace for warmth, or the wood stove boiling a kettle for drinking water. We had arrived. So that's the view that I think most of us are familiar with as you walk by. For those of you more familiar with the beach road, our cottage is the yellow place 2 down from the park. It's become sort of a local attraction as people constantly stop while walking by to have a look at whatever catches their eye. Perhaps it has something to do with the beautiful gardens my mom keeps, or possibly to look at the cottage that is basically unchanged since its original build back in about 1907. Certainly an oddity now, as the beach road is all condos and four-season homes, with all the camps a thing of the past except for ours. But more on that later. Now, how did we come to have this beautiful property on one of the most beautiful lakes in the world? Legend has it that my great-grandfather Arthur Congdon, along with Mr. Long and Mr. Stevens, of course, traveling via CP Rail, hired a First Nations gentleman, complete with deerskin clothing and his birch bark canoe, to paddle along the mainland to scout property. Upon recognizing the only expanse with the sandy beach, they proceeded to purchase those properties for their cottage locations. They probably would have stayed at Devil's Gap Lodge for this excursion. The CPR station was the hub of activity. Few had cars. Highway 44 was long and winding, a 4-hour trek at the least. The camper special arrived Friday at 8 p.m. and left Sunday at 8 p.m. It was always a social event. The dock parallel to shore was jammed with island camper boats. People dressed to kill, boats likewise. There was great activity. To speed up freight dispatch, suitcases, grips, and duffel bags were fed into a chute ending at the lake dock. Of course, once Number 1 Highway was opened in the late 50s, the CPR gave way to Greyhound, which was the death knell for the beautiful station and those social gatherings. Now, this is just a quick quote from my mom's journal. We're all trying to get things down on paper as these stories sort of fade and people pass on. So we're starting to write. This is sort of one of the purposes of my presentation today, is just to sort of get the story out there. Across the bridge to the CPR station was where every summer began. My earliest memory, arriving for the summer, black as pitch except for the wooden platform, a light, station master suite in uniform, lights on within the station, wooden chairs and benches along the wall, and the ticket wicket. On the platform, a wagon of sorts, about 4 foot by 8 foot for freight, metal wheels, no tires, and a long handle for manual pulling. Always a conductor. The red caps, of course, were only in Winnipeg. At Keewatin, you were left to your own devices. Across the bridge, past the municipal building, Powell's garage, and on to the beach road. Just a dirt road, no street lights, and a bear at every bush. My trembling legs delivered me to the cottage, always safe and sound. Officially, the property on the beach road was purchased from the Keewatin Lumbering and Manufacturing Company Limited for the sum of $100 and registered on April 19, 1907 to my great-grandfather, Arthur Congdon. Apparently, the cottage was built for the sum of $3,000, which was quite a sum in those days. Arthur Congdon, he's the gentleman at the very head of the table. He was born in Cornwallis, Nova Scotia on 18th of May, 1863, and arrived in Winnipeg in April 1882. He was first employed as a compositor with the Winnipeg Daily Times newspaper, then worked for the Hudson's Bay Company from 1886 to 1895. He entered the wholesale shoe business in February 1895. At that time, he amalgamated with James Macready Company Shoe Manufacturers, and in 1906 and became the vice president and general manager of Ames Holden Macready Limited in 1911. He organized Congdon Marsh Limited, wholesale boots and shoes, in 1914, located at 86-88 Princess Street, and that original building stands today. He was elected to the Winnipeg School Board in 1902, was its chairman in 1911, and again chairman from 1922 to 1924. He was a member of the Manitoba Club, the Carleton Club, and the Elmhurst Golf Club. He spent summers at the cottage with his wife Sarah and his 4 children, Edith, Ethel, May, that's my grandmother, and William. Just like today, many hours were spent in the boat on the lake, and in the early days, it was the Ariel. I just want to go back real quick, and my grandma is on the front left there with that blue shawl over her back. And that's the Ariel. The name of my boat now, the Ariel 2. Of course, we all love spending time on the dock. And that's I picked that shot there because it shows, it's got a bit of a shot of the cottage there. There's not many pictures that actually exist of the cottage in full back in the day. Of course, we didn't have cell phones and things like that, so pictures were fairly rare. But as you can see there, other than the stair configuration on the side of the cottage, that's the veranda and the way I see it today. Swimming, of course. Again, you could stand on our dock and look back at that breakwater, and those rocks still sit there as they do. Nothing's changed. Fishing, that's my Uncle Eric, and that's about, that'd be about probably less than 1920. That's looking west, so the Keewatin Beach is still visible there. I like this picture as well. Of course, it shows everyone having a good frolic, but when you looking east, that shoreline still really looks like that. Those boathouses are basically still there, especially the left one you can see there, but still unchanged. That's my Uncle Bill goofing around. And that's the original boathouse. Now the boathouse is that front structure has been was sort of salvaged in about 1952 and brought back to the mainland, and then, of course, the two-story structure is now gone. So, to continue on, my grandmother, May, she married my grandfather, Albert, or Bert as he was known, Crossan, and they took ownership of the cottage, I assume, after the place became too much for my great-grandfather. They had 4 children, Eric, Bob, Beth, and my mother, Diana, all of whom embraced the cottage as those before them. Both Eric and Bob served in the Canadian Navy in World War II, and their helmets hang in the living room there today. My grandparents never owned a car or drove, so in the early years they would take the train down and haul all their gear to and from the cottage every weekend. Upon retirement, and that's quite a task, I've got 3 kids and I can't imagine. Upon retirement, the train became the Greyhound bus, and in May, they would haul, including flowers for planting, everything down and stay put until close up in the fall. Trekking to the post office in McKelvey's with my grandpa, trying to keep up, of course, he had a tremendous stride, still remains a cherished memory. As things got to be too much for them, my mom assumed ownership in 1977. Because of her passion for the cottage, coupled with a meticulous gift of planning and forethought, has been able to maintain, along with her boys, me and my 2 brothers, the condition of the old place. Constant maintenance and a major project every summer is the norm. Although Arthur was the original family owner of the property, actually his parents had also paid a visit to the property some years earlier. This past summer, the 7th generation of the Congdon Crossan bloodline visited the cottage to spread the ashes of Arthur Congdon's grandson. So back in the day, this picture was taken in 1922. Back in the day, long before my time, summer homes on the beach road had names rather than addresses, as the road really was merely a path. Our cottage had the name Keewatin, which was passed down to us as Cree or possibly Ojibwa for resting place. That may or may not be the meaning, but it's certainly an accurate representation of its healing powers. Almost instantly, as you cross the threshold of the gate, you can feel the stress of everyday life release. Our highly scientific observations know that it takes 4 days before the cottage life will completely envelop you when you truly lock in to Keewatin. The cottage was built during a period of elegance. We have a cherished photo album, which is the source of some of these photos, that is filled with pictures of my ancestors and their friends. The women always in proper dresses and blouses, the men turned out in slacks and button shirts. Of course, bathing attire was modest to say the least. Remember, this was during the time of the Titanic, so some of these pictures reflect that wonderful area. The glass surrounded room visible from the road today that some of you may know was originally the maid's quarters, yet for as long as I've known, it's been the dining room. A maid, of course, was more common then, an indication of days long past. There's a couple of unique things that stand out with the cottage construction. Things that aren't visible to the outside, but inside. The coolest thing for me is the interior of the living room, which is clad entirely with tongue and groove knotless pine. What this means is that only those lengths of pine with no knots were hand-selected for finishing. Quite an extravagance back in the day, as everyone knows, pine is riddled with knots. The master bedroom is also clad in knotless pine. Also in the living room, hanging where it always has, is a large oil lamp, converted to electricity possibly in the 30s or 40s when the knob and tube wiring was added. I can't help but look at it and imagine it casting its warm glow as my ancestors socialized or just relaxed after another great day at the lake. Of course, the centerpiece is the fireplace. Still providing warmth, roasting marshmallows, and the ability to get lost in your own thoughts while gazing at its flames over 100 years since it took its first match. There was no indoor plumbing in those days, so an outhouse existed in the back lot. A hand pump mounted in the kitchen supplied water drawn from the lake, and in later years the water system was upgraded to an electric pump under the cottage, but hardly automated, as I was always involved in hauling water from the lake to assist my grandpa in priming the system in the spring. Ice was supplied for the icebox twice weekly by Moore's Ice, located on the land now being occupied by the abandoned Royal Bank building in Keewatin. The sawdust-covered block was delivered and placed on the rock beside the gate, where the sawdust had to be cleaned off before it was brought into the cottage. Of course, as time went by, things like the water system and the refrigeration were modernized. The path became a dirt road, and more camps occupied the remaining lots along the beach road. I was lucky enough to have experienced this period, although I missed out on the frosty late-night visits to the outhouse. There was an oil furnace in the living room, although I never did see it operate. There was also, as mentioned earlier on, a wood stove in the pantry/bathroom area, and on cold mornings, it was always crackling away, boiling water, or just providing some much-needed warmth. Drinking water was always something that was in production at various stages. Of course, drinking the water directly out of the lake wasn't the best idea, so there was a constant cycle of boiling, cooling, and refrigeration of water taking place. Obviously, at that time, there was no town water supply, so that's how we processed our drinking water. Showers, dishes, and the septic system were supplied by the lake water. There was an old radio that my grandpa used to fire up in the evening, and incredibly, he was able to tune in to stations from all over the northern part of the United States. Television was never a fixture at the lake, except for a 13-inch black and white that I brought down as a young teenager to watch some late-night movies. Of course, the CBC was the only thing we got. We watched the royal wedding between Charles and Di on that thing. We had a bunch of people gathered around that tiny little screen. It was hilarious. The TV was only there for a couple of summers, and to this day, we still don't have a television at the cottage. Evenings were spent hunting crayfish, beach fires, listening to music, in the Loggins boathouse next door, now the Devlin property, Scrabble or other board games in the veranda, or lying on the dock staring at the stars looking for UFOs. It was pitch dark down on the dock, and it was really like being in a planetarium. Now, I'm going to talk about the beach road. Something that shouldn't be overlooked in this historical journey is the part played by the beach road itself. As I described in my introduction, the turn from Highway 17 down 9th Avenue, which was asphalt, turned into dirt at the beach road. The road was very narrow and overgrown, so it was almost literally like entering a tunnel, especially at night. It was also basically unlit, with only the occasional light pole placed at lengthy intervals. The road had the occasional car parked off to the side, soon to be joined by others, as cottagers and guests arrived throughout the evening. Because my grandparents owned the lots behind the cottage, and we still do, there was a crude parking spot carved out of the bush so we could nose our car off the road. To this day, my mom still uses this parking spot. Those of you familiar will see her white Monte Carlo parked there all summer. Our gang of kids used to go for walks along the road at night, always with a flashlight at the insistence of our parents. Of course, we turned it off to heighten the tension, never knowing if a bear would pop out of the bush. There were always frogs or snakes to catch our eye, and June bugs and fireflies were in great abundance. Thankfully, the bear never materialized. In daylight hours, of course, being boys, the discovery of a squished snake or frog was a source of fascination throughout the summer as we watched nature take its course. None of us ever had bicycles at the lake. Space in the car was occupied by luggage, coolers, and kids, so we walked everywhere. We would explore for hours, but we always knew we were almost home when we hit the dirt of the beach road. It was actually very unique dirt, very fine, soft, and silty. This was great when you were walking on it in your bare feet, not so great when we experienced one of those classic Lake of the Woods deluges. Half the road would be washed into the lake, usually forming a massive stream that would find its way through the park. The town, of course, would come and repair the washout, only to see it wash away again with the next storm. To this day, they are still trying to figure out how to direct the water on the road. Maybe they'll get it right one day, but my money's on Mother Nature. Now, it was about 1975 or so when things changed drastically along the beach road. It was during this time that the town of Keewatin notified everyone that they would be installing a water and sewage system along the beach road, and to take any wall hangings down in the fall because there'd be blasting over the winter. Obviously, the vibrations from the blasting could cause damage. At that time, I thought this was a great idea. Now we would have fresh water. We would no longer have to prime that old system every spring. When we arrived in the spring to open the cottage, we turned off Highway 17 down 9th Street as usual and onto the beach road, complete with new asphalt. The road had been widened, the trees trimmed back, and a fresh telephone post lined the street. Now there was a cement sidewalk where the edge of the dirt road once was. We crawled out of the car. Some of those wonderful smells were gone, replaced by the city smell of fresh asphalt. Of course, it was all shiny and new to me, and now that at least I could ride my skateboard. Of course, when we entered the cottage, we tested the taps, and behold, water. No more priming the old system, cursing at the pump that took ages to pull water, or watch my grandpa fashion a new gasket out of leather to stop the leaks. Yep, this made things a lot better, or so I thought. The first night, down to the dock we went to lie on our backs to watch the stars. But something was different now. We couldn't see those stars shining quite as bright because of the new modern halogen streetlights casting their bright fingers through the trees all the way down to the dock. Those creepy walks down the road at night were a thing of the past. The old wood stove would sit idle, no longer needed to boil water, only occasionally would a fire crackle in it for a boost of warmth, until a chimney fire and a world speed record climb onto the roof by my mum, with garden hose in hand, would put an end to the wood stove permanently. Another smell gone. Of course, the arrival of all that new asphalt allowed drivers to speed up while driving down the beach road. So much for skateboarding. All those snakes and frogs that we used to see on our walks, gone. Walking on the road barefoot, not so much fun now. The impact of the new water system and the new beach road was only in its infancy at this point. Things really started to change in the next few years. First to go was our neighbors, the Longs, who were the original property owners from that scouting party with my great-grandfather. Their place was sold and razed to make way for the beautiful new home built by Ben Devlin. Slowly but surely, the original camps along the beach road began to disappear. As owners grew older and it was time for the kids to take over, quite often the decision to sell was made, maybe because the kids now had a life of their own, or had moved away and not able to provide the energy required to maintain a summer home. Whatever the reason, one by one, camps began to disappear. Of course, waterfront property is highly sought after. Now that sewer and water was available, four-season homes began to pop up everywhere. Next to arrive was the condominium units on the top of the hill. Literally, it seemed, in no time, the quaint, quiet, dark, and sometimes creepy Keewatin Beach Road had become a residential street, lined with big homes that looked the same as the ones that we left behind in the city every summer. Gone too were the people. By this I mean that at one time, you could stand at the end of the dock and look down the mainland in either direction and see all sorts of activity on the neighboring docks. Water skiing, swimming, socializing, and families just generally enjoying the lake experience. Of course, those new homes now have air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and big screen TVs to direct attention away from the lake. When I look at this slide that shows the mainland from the lake in 1922, I actually recognize this scene existing in my lifetime, no earlier than the early 70s. Now the view from the water is stark. All I see is houses and condominiums, and set amongst all this growth and progress is our little yellow cottage, seemingly holding back the progress and desperately holding on to the past. I sure do miss priming that old pump now. Next door to our cottage is the Stevens place, and although their original cottage is gone, the original two-story boathouse still stands, and you can see it there to the right. That's the Stevens boathouse. Sally Stevens takes care of the flowers and the lawns, but leaves the bigger jobs to the others. Last summer, recognizing that the boathouse had seen better days, I took it upon myself to add a new coat of paint and rebuild the upper deck. Of course, I did it to help Sally, but the reality is that I know the historical value that these structures provide. The same can be said for the yellow cottage 2 down from the park. I have a bit of a cold. Any given summer, people passing by will see some sort of construction project underway. Maintaining a 100-plus-year-old structure is not easy. You can look at the roof lines and see that things are certainly not as straight as they used to be. But stepping through the threshold of the front door is like stepping into the past. Artifacts visible in that old photo album that I mentioned earlier, whether it's part of a table setting, a picnic basket, or a chair, are still in everyday use today. I actually took my wife and my kids to the Lake of the Woods Museum a couple of summers ago. We were killing some time on a rainy day. We were touring the displays. There was pieces on display identical to the ones that I had used that morning to prepare my breakfast. The things that drive me and my brothers when we are knee-deep in an overwhelming project such as jacking of the boathouse and rebuilding the cribs and surrounding dock is to extend the historical longevity of these structures. People may ask, well, why wouldn't you just buy a garage package and build new? Or when someone inquires about purchasing the place, we always give a resounding no thanks. This property provides a critical link to the past. This is a structure that was built just after the Wright brothers made their first historic flight. The Model T was brand new. It predates the Grand Central Station and Charlie Chaplin. It welcomed my grandfather home from World War I and my two uncles from World War II. It's the very foundation of my family. The large pine trees on the property are not just a result of random growth. Each was planted upon the birth of a new family member. The smallest one is only about 4 years old, while the oldest is well over 80. Literally, every tree has a story to tell. When my uncle passed away last year, he was the young boy fishing on the dock in that slide, my mother realized that an important source of history was gone. He was quite a bit older than my mom and was a wealth of information about the very early history of the cottage. There are missing pieces now never be recovered, but by me presenting here today, at least the story of the yellow place 2 down from the park, as I experience it, is out there. So next time you walk by the place, soak it in. If you have a particular story about the place, you may catch my mom having a cup of tea or weeding her garden. Identify yourself, and you may actually get a piece of crumb cake out of the deal. So just to wrap up, I want to present some slides that show no matter how some things change, thanks to the continued existence of this place, things actually do stay the same. Got some pictures here because a lot of people aren't able to see the cottage from the lake, so that gives you an idea what it looks like. And we were out there last winter just for a walk out onto the ice. That corner is the veranda where we spend really all our time. That was fall time, just this past fall. That's my boy. So there's people, there's our young guys fishing. Little Sam there with his gritting smile. He decided it's time for me to catch a fish too, so away he went. Started trying and trying and trying, and then he got his first fish. And that's Sam just contemplating life on the dock, which was done in 1907. And Sam and Gummy looking out at the lake, just having some time. Of course, we always had visitors, invited guests and things like that. And sometimes we didn't. My mom was actually just on the dock a few minutes before that. There's the lawnmower that the bear is walking towards. She went up to get a glass of water and heard a splash and looked down, and there's the bear. And that happens all the time. We'll be sitting on the dock and deer and bear and things like that will go waltzing by. That's just a nice morning out of the veranda. Of course, boating is a big part of life, always has been. My little Steffi there, thinking that she'd like to learn how to drive the boat. So, of course, put her in the driver's seat. That's the best way to do it. There's the first pickerel. Another first pickerel. And there's the place closed up for the winter. The larger corner room there is the dining room, which was the maid's quarters I mentioned earlier. And the view that a lot of people see from the road, and what it looks like in winter. So that's my presentation. Thanks.